What would you do if the person you loved the most became your worst nightmare? If every word they spoke cut you deeper than a knife, and you were powerless to leave? This is the haunting tale of Tom, a man trapped in the clutches of emotional abuse, whose world crumbles when he discovers the ultimate betrayal. Stay until the end to see how his story unfolds. You won't believe what happens next. It was a warm summer evening at a friend's party in downtown Chicago. Tom stood awkwardly in a corner, nursing a glass of soda, unsure of how to approach the lively conversations swirling around him. That's when Megan entered the room. Her laughter echoed like music, drawing every eye toward her, including his. She was magnetic, confident, beautiful, and utterly captivating. Tom wasn't used to women like Megan. They belonged to a different world, one he didn't dare dream of touching. Yet somehow Megan noticed him. Their first conversation was like something out of a movie. Light teasing on her part, nervous stammering on his. By the end of the night, Megan had his number saved in her phone, and Tom walked home feeling like the luckiest man alive. Weeks turned into months, and their relationship blossomed. Megan loved to take charge, planning dates, introducing Tom to her glamorous friends, and even choosing what he should wear. Tom didn't mind. He liked how decisive she was, how she seemed to know exactly what she wanted in life. He didn't see the small red flags in her casual criticisms. Comments about his career as a marketing assistant or his preference for quiet nights at home. "You're too modest, Tom," she'd say half-jokingly. "If you don't speak up more, people will walk all over you." Tom laughed it off, grateful that someone like Megan had chosen him despite his shortcomings. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare he couldn't yet comprehend. Their honeymoon phase felt like a dream. Megan showered Tom with affection, making him feel wanted in a way he'd never experienced before. She praised his gentle nature, calling him her rock in a chaotic world. For Tom, this was love in its purest form. He ignored the occasional moments when her words stung, chalking them up to her being straightforward. Megan had a knack for making Tom feel special in public. "This is my boyfriend, Tom," she'd say with a dazzling smile at social events, holding his hand tightly. But behind closed doors, things were different. Megan's tone could shift from affectionate to cutting in an instant. "Do you ever think about advancing in your career?" she asked one evening as they watched TV. "I mean, you're smart, but don't you want more out of life?" Tom didn't know how to respond. Megan always seemed to be looking for something more, something he couldn't quite give her. He began working longer hours, hoping to prove himself, but no matter what he did, Megan found a way to downplay his efforts. Still, he convinced himself that this was love, real love. And love, he thought, was about making sacrifices. When Megan proposed they get married, it felt surreal to Tom. He never imagined someone like her would want to spend their life with someone like him. The wedding planning began immediately, and Megan took full control. She made it clear that this would be her day, her vision, and Tom's role was simply to agree. The venue was grand, a sprawling estate outside the city with crystal chandeliers and manicured gardens. Megan chose everything, down to the color of Tom's tie. When he hesitated about the cost, she waved him off. "Don't be cheap, Tom," she said with a sharp smile. "This is about us. Don't you want it to be perfect?" On the day of the wedding, Tom stood at the altar, feeling like a guest in his own life. Megan walked down the aisle in a dress that seemed to shine brighter than the sun. She looked stunning, and for a brief moment, Tom thought everything would be okay. But during the reception, cracks began to show. Megan made jokes about how Tom couldn't even choose the right flowers, and how she had to save the day. Her friends laughed, but Tom felt the sting in her words. Later that night, as they sat alone in their hotel suite, Tom tried to bring it up. "I felt a little hurt when you said those things about me during the reception," he said hesitantly. Megan turned to him, her face calm but her eyes cold. "Oh, come on, Tom. Don't be so sensitive. If you can't take a joke, how are we supposed to make this work?" Tom apologized immediately, even though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. He told himself that it was just the stress of the wedding. But deep down, He felt the first seed of doubt planting itself in his heart. Married life wasn't what Tom expected. Megan became more demanding, more critical. She started comparing him to her colleagues, her friends' husbands, and even strangers. "Did you see how Mark just got promoted? He's only been at his company for 2 years, Tom. 2 years. What have you been doing with your life?" First, Tom tried to brush it off. He thought Megan just wanted to motivate him. But as the comments grew sharper, he began to internalize them. He started working longer hours, skipping lunch breaks, and volunteering for extra projects, hoping to impress her. Megan's reaction was lukewarm at best. "Well, it's a start," she said when he proudly told her about a new assignment he landed. Her dissatisfaction seeped into every part of their life together. If he cooked dinner, she'd complain that it was too bland. If he suggested a movie night, she'd roll her eyes and say, "That's boring. Can't you think of anything fun?" Tom's confidence, already fragile, began to erode. He found himself apologizing for things he hadn't even done wrong. One evening, as they were getting ready for bed, Megan dropped another bombshell. "You know, sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd ended up with someone more ambitious," she said casually, as if discussing the weather. Tom froze. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. Megan shrugged. "Nothing. Just thinking out loud." That night, Tom lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't enough for her, and no matter how hard he tried, he never would be. As Megan's criticisms intensified, she began to isolate Tom from his friends and family. "Your mom is too controlling," she said one evening after dinner. "She's always judging me. I think we should take a step back from her for a while." Tom was shocked. His mother had always been kind to Megan, but he didn't want to upset his wife. Reluctantly, he agreed to see his family less often. Then came his friends. Megan didn't like how they teased her about being bossy, so she started planting doubts in Tom's mind. "Do you really think they're good friends? They don't respect you. They just make fun of you behind your back," she said. Little by little, Tom's social circle shrank. He stopped going out with friends, stopped calling his parents as often. Megan became his entire world, just as she wanted. Tom didn't realize what was happening at the time. He told himself that he was just prioritizing his marriage, that Megan needed him to be there for her. But the truth was, he was being cut off from the people who cared about him most. Megan filled the void with her own friends, successful, confident people who only reinforced her criticisms of Tom. During dinners and gatherings, they would talk about their careers, their vacations, their accomplishments. Megan would chime in, her voice full of pride, but not for Tom. "James just closed $1 million deal," she said one night, referring to her colleague. "He's so driven. You should talk to him, Tom. Maybe you'll learn something." Tom felt invisible. He started to believe that he wasn't good enough. Not for Megan, not for anyone. Tom first heard about James during one of Megan's casual monologues about her day. She often spoke about her colleagues, but James seemed to come up more often than the rest. "James is incredible at what he does," she said one evening over dinner, her eyes lighting up in a way that Tom couldn't ignore. "He just pitched this massive project, and everyone in the office was blown away. Honestly, I think the company would fall apart without him." Tom nodded politely, trying to hide the discomfort tightening in his chest. Megan had always admired ambition and success, and James seemed to embody everything Tom wasn't. As the weeks went by, James's name became a constant in their conversations. Megan shared stories about how he handled difficult clients, how he dressed impeccably, how he made everyone laugh during meetings. "You could learn a lot from James," she said one day as they sat on the couch. "He's confident, decisive, the kind of guy people naturally respect." Tom felt the sting of her words but didn't argue. He never did. Instead, he buried himself in work, hoping to prove that he could be just as capable, just as impressive. He started staying late at the office, taking on projects that weren't even his responsibility. But no matter how hard he tried, Megan's praise remained reserved for James. One Friday evening, Megan announced that she had invited James to join them for dinner. "It'll be good for you to meet him," she said, her tone suggesting it wasn't a request. He might even be able to give you some career advice. The thought of sitting across from this man, this paragon of everything Megan admired, made Tom's stomach churn. But he agreed, as he always did, because opposing Megan felt impossible. When James arrived, he was everything Tom had feared. Tall, confident, and charismatic. He greeted Megan with a warmth that felt too familiar, then turned to Tom with a firm handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Throughout the evening, Tom felt like a bystander in his own home. Megan and James dominated the conversation, laughing and sharing inside jokes from the office. Tom tried to contribute, but his attempts were either ignored or met with polite disinterest. At one point, Megan leaned toward James, her hand briefly touching his arm as she laughed at something he said. Tom noticed the way James's eyes lingered on her, the way Megan seemed to glow in his presence. "You've got a great wife, Tom," James said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "She's a real gem." Tom forced a smile, but his insides felt like they were unraveling. That night, as he lay in bed next to Megan, he couldn't shake the feeling that James was more than just a colleague. He wanted to confront her, to ask why she seemed so captivated by this man, but he didn't know how. Instead, he turned over and stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with insecurities. Megan, as if sensing his unease, reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't overthink it, Tom," she murmured, her voice laced with a strange mix of tenderness and condescension. "James is just a friend. You really need to stop being so paranoid." Tom didn't respond. He didn't believe her, but he didn't have the strength to argue. In that moment, he realized just how powerless he had become in their relationship. The weeks after that dinner with James were some of the most difficult of Tom's life. James's presence seemed to loom over every part of their relationship, even when he wasn't physically there. Megan brought him up constantly, how he closed another major deal, how he managed to stay so composed under pressure, or how the entire office admired him. "You should have seen James today," Megan said one evening as they sat at the dinner table. "The way he handled that client was pure genius. He really knows how to command a room. It's inspiring." Tom felt the familiar sting in her words, like a dull blade carving into his already fragile sense of self. He tried to redirect the conversation, but Megan's excitement was unrelenting. "I think you'd really benefit from spending more time with someone like James," she added casually, as if she were doing him a favor by saying so. "Maybe he could teach you a thing or two about leadership." Tom didn't reply. He didn't know what to say anymore. Every comparison to James felt like another nail in the coffin of his self-esteem. Megan wasn't just criticizing him. She was making it clear that he didn't measure up to the men she admired. Things escalated when Megan started spending more time at work. Late nights at the office became the norm, and her excuses were always the same. "We're working on a big project," she said, brushing off Tom's concerns. "It's not just me. Everyone's staying late." But when Tom tried to press for details, Megan grew defensive. "Why are you being so insecure?" she snapped one night when he questioned why she hadn't answered his calls. "Do you think I'm lying? God, Tom, this is why I don't tell you things. You always blow everything out of proportion." Her words stung, but what hurt more was the growing distance between them. Megan seemed more vibrant, more alive, when she talked about work, about James. But when it came to Tom, her tone was flat, dismissive, as if he were an obligation she had to endure. One evening, Tom decided to surprise her at the office. He picked up her favorite coffee and drove downtown, hoping to spend a few moments together, to remind her of the connection they once had. When he arrived, the office was dark. The receptionist, who was packing up for the night, looked confused when Tom asked if Megan was still there. "She left hours ago," the woman said, her tone matter-of-fact. Tom felt his stomach drop. He stood in the empty lobby for several minutes, clutching the coffee cups as his mind raced. Where was she? When Megan came home later that night, Tom was waiting for her. "How was work?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Megan didn't even look up from her phone. "Exhausting," she said, kicking off her heels. We've been so swamped lately. I barely had time to breathe. Tom stared at her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I went to your office tonight, he said quietly. You weren't there. For the first time in months, Megan hesitated. Her eyes flickered with something Tom couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe, or anger. Are you spying on me now? She demanded, her voice sharp. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Tom. You're so paranoid. I can't even work late without you accusing me of something. Tom's voice broke as he replied. Then tell me the truth. Where were you? Megan's face hardened. I don't owe you an explanation, she said coldly. I'm tired of you questioning me all the time. If you can't trust me, maybe this marriage isn't working anymore. Her words hit him like a physical blow. For a moment, he thought she might apologize, might reassure him. But instead, she walked past him and disappeared into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Tom stood in the living room, staring at the spot where Megan had been moments ago. The coffee cups in his hands had gone cold, but he didn't move. He felt like a ghost in his own home, invisible and unwanted. That night he didn't sleep. His mind was a storm of doubt and despair, replaying every moment of their relationship, searching for where it had all gone wrong. Deep down, he knew the truth. Megan was slipping further and further away from him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. After that night, something shifted in Tom. He tried to convince himself that Megan's harsh words were just the result of stress, that the growing distance between them could be bridged if he tried hard enough. But deep down, he knew things were spiraling out of his control. Megan, on the other hand, seemed unaffected. If anything, her confidence grew, as if the argument had fortified her belief that Tom was the problem. She spent even more time away from home, her explanations vague and perfunctory. I'll be late again tonight, she said one morning as she rushed out the door. Don't wait up. Tom watched her leave, a knot tightening in his chest. He felt trapped between his growing suspicions and his desperation to hold on to her. He started staying up late, sitting in the dimly lit living room, waiting for her to come home. Each time she walked through the door, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers, he wanted to ask her where she had been, who she had been with, but the words always got stuck in his throat. One evening, Tom decided to text her during one of her late nights at work. His hands trembled as he typed the message. Hey, just checking in. Are you okay? The minutes stretched into hours without a response. Finally, close to midnight, Megan replied with a single line. Busy. Don't worry about me. The detachment in her words stung more than Tom expected. He stared at the screen, debating whether to push further, but he knew it wouldn't end well. Megan had a way of twisting his concerns into accusations, making him feel small and irrational. In his loneliness, Tom started replaying old memories of their relationship, the way Megan used to laugh at his jokes, the way she once held his hand like she never wanted to let go. He clung to those moments, hoping they could be salvaged, but the person Megan had become felt like a stranger. One night, as he sat alone on the couch, he noticed Megan had left her laptop open on the dining table. It was something she rarely did, and for a moment Tom hesitated. He hated the idea of invading her privacy, but his doubts were suffocating him. He walked over, his heart pounding, and opened the laptop. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just emails and work documents. But then a notification popped up, a message from James. Tom froze, his eyes locked on the screen. The message read, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." The room seemed to tilt as Tom's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. His hands shook as he clicked on the message, revealing a string of texts between Megan and James. They were playful, flirtatious, and intimate in a way that made Tom's stomach churn. "You looked incredible today," one message from James read. "I couldn't stop thinking about you." "Your trouble," Megan had replied, followed by a winking emoji. Tom closed the laptop and stumbled back, his chest tight with panic. He felt like he couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in around him. He wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but the thought of facing her cold, dismissive gaze was too much to bear. When Megan came home later that night, she was cheerful, almost glowing. "Hey," she said casually, tossing her bag onto the couch. "Why are you still up?" Tom stared at her, his emotions a volatile mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. He wanted to scream, to cry, to demand to know how she could betray him like this. But instead, he simply said, "I couldn't sleep." Megan shrugged, oblivious to the storm raging inside him. "Well, don't stay up too late. You'll be a zombie tomorrow." She kissed him on the cheek, her lips cold and perfunctory, before disappearing into the bedroom. Tom sat there, staring at the empty space she had left behind. For the first time, he realized just how deeply he had lost her, and perhaps how deeply he had lost himself. The days after discovering Megan's messages felt like walking through a fog. Tom couldn't shake the image of the texts, the intimate exchanges between Megan and James. Every time he saw her, he felt the weight of that knowledge pressing down on him, suffocating him. Yet, when he tried to confront her, the words failed him. He felt small, powerless, trapped in his own home, unable to face the woman he had once loved. He spent the next few days in a haze of confusion and anger. His work started to suffer as he became consumed by thoughts of what Megan might be doing when she wasn't with him. He no longer felt like he knew her, and worse, he didn't think she cared to know him anymore. Tom tried to act normal. He went through the motions, making dinner, cleaning up, pretending that everything was fine. But inside, he was unraveling. Megan, on the other hand, continued with her usual routine, barely noticing the change in his behavior. She still spent her nights away from home, her excuses growing thinner, her dismissive comments sharper. It wasn't until the weekend came that Tom finally found the courage to confront her. They were sitting in the living room, Tom on the couch, Megan lounging in a chair with her phone in her hand. He had been rehearsing his words in his head for days, but now that the moment had arrived, he felt paralyzed. "Megan." His voice was shaky, but he forced himself to speak. "I know about you and James." Megan looked up from her phone, her expression unreadable. For a split second, Tom thought he saw a flicker of panic in her eyes, but it was gone before he could be sure. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice flat. "The messages. I saw them. You and James." Tom could feel the heat rising in his face, the anger threatening to spill over. "How long has this been going on?" Megan's response was nothing like Tom had imagined. She didn't apologize. She didn't seem guilty or even shocked. Instead, she sighed, leaning back in the chair. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," she said, almost nonchalantly. "To be honest, I didn't think you cared enough to notice." Tom felt the words hit him like a punch to the gut. He stared at her, stunned by the coldness in her tone. "You think I don't care?" he whispered, the realization dawning on him that he had been nothing more than a placeholder for her. A man she tolerated because it was convenient, but never truly valued. Megan didn't respond right away. She just stared at him, her eyes unreadable. Then she shrugged. "Tom, let's be real here. You've never been the man I needed. I tried to make it work, I really did, but you're just not enough. Not like James." The words sliced through Tom like a knife. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had spent years trying to be what she wanted, trying to be a better husband, a better man, and this was the result. "So this is it?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You've been seeing him behind my back all this time, and you're just telling me now?" Megan let out a sharp laugh, one that cut through the silence like glass shattering. "What did you expect, Tom? That I'd stay with you forever because you can't get it together? I'm not some charity case. I have needs, and I'm tired of pretending that you can meet them." Tom's heart sank as the full weight of her words hit him. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the lies. It was the utter lack of respect for him as a person, the casual cruelty that Megan had displayed without a second thought. For a moment he sat there, unable to move, unable to think. He had been living in a relationship that was a lie, one where his every insecurity was validated, where his worth was always measured against someone else, and where, in the end, he wasn't enough. Megan stood up from her chair, her eyes flashing with impatience. "I don't know what you want from me, Tom," she said, her tone cold. "I've already made my decision. I'm not going to keep going in circles with you. I've moved on." She turned to walk away, but Tom couldn't let it end like this. "You're really going to leave me for him?" His voice was hoarse, the words barely escaping his throat. Megan paused at the door, her back to him. She didn't even turn around. "I'm not leaving you for him, Tom," she said, her voice distant. "I'm leaving you because you've never been the man I needed. He's just easier." With that, she walked out, leaving Tom alone in the empty, suffocating silence of their home. The walls that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. The days following Megan's departure were a blur of numbness. Tom didn't know what he expected after their confrontation. Some kind of closure, perhaps, or an apology. But what he got instead was a crushing sense of emptiness. The home he had once shared with Megan felt foreign, like a house he was simply passing through, a place where he didn't belong. He wandered aimlessly through the rooms, touching objects he had once shared with her. Her coffee cup left on the kitchen counter, the jacket she had left hanging on the chair. Everything reminded him of what he had lost. But more than the tangible things, it was the loss of himself that haunted him. He had spent so long living in the shadow of Megan's expectations, trying desperately to become the man she wanted, that he had forgotten who he was. It was as if, in trying to be everything for her, he had become nothing. For the first time in a long while, Tom allowed himself to feel his pain. He didn't have to be strong for anyone anymore. No one was there to see his brokenness. And so, he let the tears come, letting them fall in the quiet of his living room, as if crying could somehow cleanse him of the betrayal, the rejection, the years of being made to feel inadequate. He called in sick to work the next day. The thought of facing anyone, pretending to be the person he used to be, felt like an insurmountable task. Instead, he sat on the couch in the dim light, staring at the television with no interest in anything on the screen. His thoughts, like the static on the screen, were scattered and chaotic, tumbling over one another. The silence in the house was deafening. It seemed like Megan's absence had taken everything with her. The laughter, the warmth, the life they had once shared. What remained was an overwhelming void, a place where Tom felt like he no longer existed. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, but it was different now. Cold, indifferent, like she had never truly cared about him. He couldn't stop thinking about her and James, imagining them together, laughing, sharing intimate moments while he sat alone in this empty shell of a life. The jealousy and hurt twisted inside him, poisoning any shred of dignity he had left. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the realization that Megan had never truly seen him for who he was. She had never loved him for anything more than what she could get out of him. The more he thought about it, the more it became clear. She had always been searching for someone else, someone better, someone like James. And Tom had been nothing more than a convenient placeholder until she found him. By the third day of her absence, Tom couldn't take it anymore. He needed answers, or at least some sense of resolution. He knew it was futile, but he reached for his phone and dialed Megan's number. It rang 3 times before she picked up. "Tom!" Her voice was cold, detached. "What do you want?" The words stuck in his throat. What did he want? Answers? Closure? He wasn't sure. All he knew was that he couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. "Megan, please," he said, his voice raw. "Can we talk? Can we at least talk about this? I need to understand. Why? Why did you do this?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Tom could hear her breathing, the faint sound of traffic in the background. "I don't owe you anything, Tom," she finally said, her tone flat. "I've told you everything. I'm done. It's over." The finality in her words hit him like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that she had already moved on, that she had let go of everything they had, and he had never even seen it coming. "But I still love you," Tom whispered, more to himself than to her. "I don't know how to let go." For a moment there was silence on the other end. Then Megan spoke again, her voice colder than before. "You need to let go, Tom. It's over. And you need to accept it. There's nothing left for us here. With that, she hung up. Tom stood there, the phone still pressed to his ear, but all he could hear was the dial tone. It was like a bell ringing in his mind, signaling the end of everything. He stared at the phone for a long time, trying to process the finality of the conversation. It was over. Megan was gone. There was no going back. And for the first time, Tom realized that he had been living in a dream that had crumbled before his eyes, leaving nothing but a cold, empty reality. He wasn't sure what to do next. The life he had built was gone, and now he was left to pick up the pieces of a broken heart, of a broken man. But one thing was clear. He couldn't keep living in the past. He had to find a way to move forward, even if it meant facing the harsh truth of who he had become. Tom spent the next few days in a kind of trance, lost between the present and the past, trapped in the echo of his memories of Megan. Each room in the house felt like a ghost of the life they had once shared. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, everything felt like a relic of a time when he had been a different man, a man with purpose, with love, and with hope. But now that man felt like a distant memory. Who was Tom without Megan? Without the woman who had been his everything? She had been the center of his world for so long, and now she was gone, leaving him to question who he was without her. The weight of the silence pressed down on him. He could no longer ignore the fact that he had allowed himself to be consumed by her, by their relationship, to the point where he had forgotten how to live for himself. Everywhere he went, there was a constant reminder of his failure. The photograph of their wedding day, the half-empty bed, the chair she used to sit in while they watched TV together. Each one felt like a painful reminder of how far things had fallen. Tom had invested so much in the idea of who he wanted to be for Megan that he had neglected to invest in the most important thing, himself. He spent the next few days avoiding his friends, avoiding the world. He couldn't face anyone who knew him as Megan's husband. He didn't want their pity, their judgment, or worse, their questions. Instead, he buried himself in his work, though even that felt hollow. The days blurred together in a dull haze of routine, a meaningless cycle that offered no escape from the aching emptiness he felt inside. Then one evening, as he was sitting alone in the living room, staring at the muted TV screen, something shifted. Tom realized that he had been waiting for something external to change, for Megan to come back, for her to apologize, for life to somehow fix itself. But the truth hit him like a lightning bolt. No one was going to fix this. No one could. It was up to him. If he wanted to heal, if he wanted to regain some semblance of himself, he had to start with the painful task of confronting the person he had become. Tom stood up and walked to the mirror in the hallway. For the first time in days, he looked at his reflection, not with self-pity, but with raw honesty. He saw a man who had lost his way, a man who had been swallowed whole by his need for validation and approval. But more than that, he saw a man who was still capable of change. He wasn't dead inside. He wasn't irreparably broken. It was a painful realization, but it was also liberating. For the first time in a long while, Tom felt the stirrings of something deep within him, an ember of hope that had not yet been extinguished. The next day, Tom decided to take the first step toward reclaiming his life. He signed up for therapy. He didn't know what to expect or if it would even help, but he knew that he couldn't keep going like this. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. At his first session, Tom sat on the couch, unsure of what to say. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Miller, smiled at him and waited for him to speak. For a long time, there was only silence. Tom felt as though he were a stranger in his own skin, unsure of where to begin. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted, his voice shaking slightly. "I feel like I've lost everything, my wife, my sense of self, my dignity. I don't know who I am anymore." Dr. Miller nodded gently, her eyes understanding. "It sounds like you're going through a process of grief, Tom. Losing someone you love is incredibly painful, but it's also a loss of the person you thought you were with them. It's normal to feel lost and uncertain right now." Tom blinked back tears, but the floodgates didn't open. He had cried so much already that he wasn't sure if there were any tears left. But there was something about Dr. Miller's calm, non-judgmental presence that made him feel safe. As though, for once, it was okay to just feel the pain without having to hide it. I don't know how to move on, Tom said, his voice cracking. I feel like I've wasted so much time being someone I'm not, just to make her happy. And now I'm left with nothing. I'm so ashamed of who I became, and I don't know how to get back to me. Dr. Miller was quiet for a moment, letting his words sink in. The shame you're feeling, Tom, is not a reflection of who you are. It's a reflection of what you've been through. You've been living for someone else for so long that you've lost sight of your own needs, your own worth. But it's never too late to rediscover who you are and what you want out of life. Tom listened intently, feeling a flicker of hope in his chest. He had spent so long thinking that he was broken beyond repair, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this. Maybe he could rebuild himself. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only option he had left. As the session came to an end, Dr. Miller handed him a piece of paper with some exercises to work on for the next week. Tom left her office feeling strangely lighter. For the first time in days, he felt a small spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The following week was a blur of conflicting emotions. Tom had started therapy, which was both painful and cathartic. Every session with Dr. Miller felt like peeling back layers of a wound he hadn't known was so deep. It was as if he had spent years walking around with a broken bone, never realizing it needed healing, and now the fracture was being laid bare. Each day he faced a new challenge. He could no longer numb himself with work, distractions, or the endless cycle of self-loathing. The pain was unavoidable, but in a strange way, he was beginning to understand that this was part of the process of healing. The emotional numbness that had once enveloped him was finally starting to crack, and under the surface, the raw truth was emerging. He began to follow Dr. Miller's advice, to allow himself to feel, to sit with the discomfort, and to be present with his emotions instead of running from them. But it wasn't easy. Every day, Tom faced the reality of his life without Megan, the void she had left behind, and the overwhelming weight of regret. Yet, he also began to discover something else, an unexpected strength. It started small moments when he would catch himself smiling at something on TV or when he made a simple decision on his own, without seeking her approval or validation. He began to rediscover parts of himself he had buried for years. He liked cooking again, something he had once loved, but had stopped doing because Megan had always been critical of his attempts. One evening, after a long day at work, Tom came home and decided to cook a simple meal for himself. It wasn't much, just pasta and a quick sauce, but the act of cooking for himself, of nourishing his body without the expectation of anyone else's approval, felt like a small victory. As he sat down to eat, he couldn't help but think of the countless nights he had spent cooking dinner for Megan, trying to please her, only to be met with indifference or criticism. He had thought those gestures were an expression of love, but now, sitting alone, he realized they had been a way to gain her approval, to earn her affection. And when it didn't come, he had swallowed the hurt, pretending it didn't matter. That night, as he cleaned up his dishes, Tom had an epiphany. He didn't need anyone's approval but his own. The weight of his self-doubt had been shackling him for years, but now, he felt the first stirrings of freedom. Tom continued to see Dr. Miller, each session providing him with new tools to process his grief and pain. He learned to confront his negative self-talk, to replace the harsh words he had internalized with kinder, more compassionate ones. He also began to write in a journal, another suggestion from Dr. Miller, as a way to untangle his thoughts and explore the depths of his emotions. Some nights, he would sit in the quiet of his living room and pour his feelings onto the pages, letting the ink flow freely as he wrote about the loss of Megan, the betrayal, and the pain. But he also wrote about his hopes for the future, about what he wanted for himself moving forward. It wasn't easy. There were days when the darkness seemed all-consuming. He still missed Megan, still questioned what went wrong, still felt the sting of her rejection. But there were also moments, fleeting but real, when he felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of light in the midst of his grief. One afternoon, as he was out running errands, Tom bumped into an old friend from college, Sarah. They hadn't spoken in years, But when she saw him, she walked over with a warm smile and greeted him with genuine affection. They spent the next hour catching up over coffee, and Tom found himself opening up in a way he hadn't with anyone in a long time. Sarah listened, offering her support without judgment. She didn't try to fix him or offer empty platitudes. She simply allowed him to speak, to vent, and to be heard. As the conversation shifted from the past to the present, Sarah asked, "What's next for you, Tom?" Tom paused, his heart thudding in his chest. He had never truly thought about the future, not without Megan. For so long, his plans had been built around her, around the idea of them together. But now, with Sarah's question lingering in the air, something inside him clicked. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I think I'm finally starting to figure out what it means to live for myself again." That moment, simple as it was a turning point for Tom. For the first time since Megan left, he realized that his life was his own. He didn't need to rely on anyone else for his sense of worth. He could start fresh. He could rebuild. Over the following weeks, Tom began to implement small changes. He started going to the gym, something he hadn't done in years. He joined a book club, meeting new people and engaging in conversations that didn't revolve around his past. He took up new hobbies, and most importantly, he stopped hiding from his pain. There were still difficult days when the pain of losing Megan seemed unbearable, when memories of their time together would flood his mind and leave him raw. But he was learning how to sit with that pain without letting it consume him. As he continued his journey of self-discovery, Tom realized that healing wasn't a straight line. There would be setbacks, there would be moments of doubt, but there would also be progress. And that progress, no matter how small, was worth celebrating. For the first time in a long time, Tom felt like he was finally coming back to life. As the weeks wore on, Tom began to feel a quiet sense of stability returning to his life. The emptiness that had swallowed him after Megan's departure had not vanished completely, but it had dulled, like the echo of a painful memory that, over time, lost its sharpness. He was making progress, and in some ways he felt proud of himself. But the truth was that despite all the strides he had made, there were moments when the weight of his past threatened to pull him under. One afternoon, Tom received an unexpected call from Megan. It had been months since they'd last spoken, and the mere sight of her name on his phone sent a wave of anxiety crashing over him. He had worked so hard to detach himself from her, to rebuild his life without her presence haunting him. But now, just like that, everything was on the verge of unraveling. He hesitated for a long moment before answering. He wasn't sure if he was ready to hear her voice again, to be reminded of everything they had lost. But curiosity, mixed with a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for reconciliation, made him press the green button. "Tom." Megan's voice was soft but distant, as if she were speaking through a fog. "I need to talk to you." Tom's heart skipped a beat. His stomach twisted. He had braced himself for this moment, but now that it was here, he felt unprepared. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the anxiety still surged through his veins. "What is it, Megan?" His voice sounded different than it had months ago. Calmer, more measured, but still tinged with the remnants of the pain she had caused. I've been thinking a lot about everything," she continued, her tone uncertain. "I know things ended badly between us, but I was hoping we could talk. I don't know. Maybe I owe you some kind of explanation." Tom's mind raced. Explanation? After everything she had done? After the way she had left him without so much as a backward glance? Did she honestly think an explanation could fix what she had broken? But a part of him, despite the healing he had done, still longed for closure. "I don't think there's much to talk about, Megan," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You made your choice. You walked away. I've been learning to live with that." But Megan wasn't ready to let go. "Tom, please," she begged. "I'm not asking for us to get back together. I want you to understand why I did what I did. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want it to end like this." The words were like poison, each one dripping into Tom's mind. Did she think he could just forget the pain of her betrayal? Did she think she could explain away everything she had done, all the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal of their marriage? His heart clenched, the memories flooding back, of her coldness, of her laughter with James, of the way she had treated him like an afterthought. He wanted to hang up. He wanted to end the conversation right there and shut her out of his life for good. But something inside him, some long-buried hope, refused to let go. He needed to hear her words, needed to understand why everything had fallen apart. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did," Tom said, his voice shaking with emotion. "But I'm listening." Megan's voice softened, and for a moment, Tom thought he heard regret, real regret. "I was selfish, Tom. I didn't know how to love you anymore. I think I was afraid of losing myself in you, of losing my own identity. And I didn't know how to fix it, so I ran." Tom closed his eyes, the words slicing through him like shards of glass. He had always suspected that she hadn't truly loved him, but hearing it from her mouth, hearing her admit that she had abandoned him because she was afraid of losing herself, made the pain even sharper. Was that all he had been to her? A distraction from her own insecurities? But there was more. "And James, I didn't plan for it to happen the way it did," Megan continued, her voice breaking. "It wasn't about him being better than you. It was about me not knowing who I was anymore, and him being someone who made me feel seen, even if it was only for a little while. I didn't know how to ask you for the space I needed, so I took it in the worst way possible." Tom sat in stunned silence. The betrayal, the affair, it wasn't just about lust or desire. It was about her own struggles, her own insecurities, her inability to communicate. And yet, she had dragged him through the fire without ever considering the damage she was doing to him. "You didn't think about me at all, did you?" Tom finally said, his voice bitter. "You didn't think about the fact that I loved you, that I would have done anything for you. You just took what you needed and walked away, leaving me to pick up the pieces." Megan was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was full of tears. "I'm sorry, Tom. I really am. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to want to be friends. I needed you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to fix what was broken." For a long time, Tom didn't say anything. The silence between them felt like the weight of years of hurt pressing down on him, suffocating him. Finally, he spoke. "You can't fix it, Megan. It's done. It's over. And I'm done too." He didn't wait for a response before hanging up. For a moment, he just stood there, the phone still in his hand. He felt hollow, like a part of him had just been torn open again. But this time, it was different. This time, the pain didn't consume him. It didn't destroy him. It just was. Tom knew he had made the right decision, but as he sank into the couch, he allowed himself to feel everything. The anger, the sadness, the disbelief. He had faced the darkest moment of his life, but he had survived it. And in that survival, he had found something he hadn't expected. Peace. Tom woke up the next morning feeling an unusual sense of clarity. The conversation with Megan had been difficult, but it had also been the final piece of the puzzle. Her words, painful as they were, had allowed him to see things more clearly. He realized that he had been holding on to a version of the past that no longer existed, a version that only hurt him when he tried to hold it close. For the first time in months, Tom felt like he could breathe again. Megan's betrayal, her absence, no longer had the power to control his thoughts. He had finally let go. The anger, the sadness, they still lingered in small corners of his mind, but they no longer defined him. As he sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee, Tom realized that letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing to stop carrying the weight of the past. It meant acknowledging the pain, but refusing to let it dictate his future. That afternoon, Tom took a walk in the park. The trees were beginning to bloom, the air warm with the promise of spring. He smiled to himself. There was still so much life left to live. As the days passed, Tom found himself falling into a new rhythm. He had started doing things for himself that he had forgotten he enjoyed, like going for runs early in the morning, reading books he had always wanted to explore, and even taking up painting again. These small joys began to fill the gaps that had once been consumed by the pain of his past. One afternoon, while walking through the city, Tom passed a cafe he used to frequent with Megan. For a moment, the old memories rushed back. Sitting at a small table, sipping coffee together, talking about everything and nothing at all. But now, those memories felt distant, like a story someone else had lived. He walked inside the cafe, ordered his coffee, and found a seat by the window. As he sipped the warm liquid, Tom reflected on how far he had come. The bitterness that once clung to the thought of Megan was now replaced by a quiet acceptance. He no longer needed to seek her approval, nor did he need to seek validation from anyone else. He had learned to value himself for who he was, flaws and all. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sarah, the friend he had reconnected with. "Hey, how are you doing? Want to meet up for dinner tonight?" Tom smiled at the screen, feeling a warmth in his chest. He hadn't felt the need to hide from life anymore. For the first time in a long time, he was open to new connections, new beginnings. The road ahead wasn't perfect, and Tom knew there would be moments of doubt. But he was no longer the broken man he had been. He was learning to stand tall, to embrace the future, and to trust that whatever came next, he would be okay. And in that moment, as he looked out the cafe window at the world passing by, Tom finally understood the freedom that came with letting go of the past. It wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about choosing to live in the present, with hope and without fear. Thank you for following Tom's journey. If his story resonates with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to let go of something or someone to find peace? Share your experiences and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.